Hello, I'm Dr. Basil Considine, and today we're going to be talking about how to make a story tree. Now, if you are looking at this on a recording, we're going to be focusing specifically on how to do visualizations of ideas using as a starting point a assignment that comes from our literature program. We're going to be looking at the ENGO 221 Week 1 assignment, Mind Map Creative Project. Now, this is a multifaceted assignment, and it has both actually two generative components where you need to create some visual references, and then you need to write a short reflection essay. Now, usually the reflection essay isn't a problem. People usually have the most common question being just, how long is that? So 100 to 200 words. Well, if you use our APA course paper template, that's going to be roughly 250 words to a page. So that's somewhere in the realm of a third to almost a whole page. So not long, probably 2 or 3 short paragraphs, and it's reflection. So tell us what you learned from the assignment. That's not something I expect you'll have any trouble with. But the question of how do you do the visualization, I'm going to say first, you don't need special software. You don't need to have Photoshop. You don't need a drawing tablet. If you do have those things, great. If they're tools you know, you can certainly use them. You can also use Lucidchart, which is one of the recommended resources here, Adobe Illustrator, which is a more high-end vector drawing program that you get free access to as a ACU student, or you could draw by hand. Now, whether you find it more convenient to draw by hand using a pen and paper, or actually any marking tools, you could use markers, pencils, crayons even. The point is to illustrate the idea in a way that helps make it easy to understand. And we're going to talk about some things related to this assignment later. But let's divide up this assignment into some different segments to understand how the information is being presented to you and what is actually giving you instructions on the deliverables. So the assignment description starts with the preamble, where they state the purpose of this assignment: to practice and understand the ways in which an individual story has its origins in earlier stories, either in plot, genres, archetypes, or other similarities, and to practice following a character through the hero's journey. Finally, reflect briefly on what you have learned from this module focused on the idea and value of story. And then we have a more specific description of the assignment. These aren't the instructions yet, but a description of the assignment saying this has 3 parts, 2 drawings, and a short reflection. So that's 3 deliverables that will be combined, 2 drawings and a reflection. You may choose to use one of the free digital drawing tools available, such as Lucidchart or Adobe Illustrator, or anything else that you're familiar with. Or you may choose to simply draw the assignment with paper and pencil or markers and upload your drawing to the assignment page. And then you're tasked to choose a favorite story of diverse sources and to look at some different ways of visualizing them. You could use the cauldron method, as you have a bunch of ingredients that are mixed together and added by the people who made this specific story. Or you can draw the tree of the tale model. And both of these are aimed at telling us what the key elements of these are. And in some cases, the tree more so than the cauldron, on the order or causality through which they're connected. And then we have some guiding notes. Keep in mind the similar origins of the story or film, such as perhaps the North's mythological origins of the Avengers, or the crime fiction tropes and archetypes present in the recent film Knives Out, or perhaps the way a recent story rethinks gender roles, for example. On the second page, place a character from the story you chose into the hero's journey, following the cycle suggested in the hero's journey diagram. And then finally, that short reflection that we mentioned. we look at the grading rubric, it's pretty specific. You have these 3 required elements, and if they're all done clearly in terms of your reflection, in terms of where you're positioning the hero's journey, and having a clear rationale why, which might involve placing some intermediate steps there. And then with the story super story tree diagram, that you have the story topic with clear choices. So let's go ahead and take a look at how to draw one of these elements or more of these elements in Microsoft Word. Now, the hero's journey, we're referring to a process as described by Joseph Campbell, who wrote out a 17-stage process, or which is to say, in his most eloquent and detailed iteration of this, described a 17-stage process. Now, as you can see with this diagram, there's a lot of stuff going on, and some of them, like belly of the whale, that's more you're feeling at a low point rather than literally swallowed by a whale, as in, say, the biblical story of Jonah. Now, these are some of the elements he identified as being very common, but we have them sorted into the separation from wherever you are coming from, the initiation, where much of the quest happens, and then the victory or success that leads to the return. Now, not every story will follow this. This is a convenient way of classifying many stories, and for understanding that a large portion of stories, especially those that we might consume in, say, Hollywood, have some process by which someone comes to a victory and which they return to their home or their friend group or their spaceship or whatever it might be. So this is another way of representing that. And you can see we have some visual signs here. We have some descriptions. So this is another way of approaching that same concept. And then here's a way of condensing it into 12 steps. And this isn't the only way. In fact, we could condense it down to 7. And there are some that will just go down to the 3 core ones that were described back here as separation, return, and sorry, let me give you the correct order. Separation, initiation, return. And here is boiled down into, we go from the known to the unknown, have a revelation, and then ultimately return back to the known. And I think it's helpful to keep in mind that Joseph Campbell developed this to explain and point out commonalities he saw in a wide variety of myths that told us something about that particular genre of storytelling. Now, many other people have applied it in other areas and used it as a model for creating rather than in something that was gained by analysis looking at a body of repertoire. And truthfully, we don't know how conscious the people who created the Greek legends and myths were of this. But certainly, if you are based in a city, if you have a permanent home, the idea of a hero leaving, doing great things, and coming back to share the insights, the fruits, to enrich the community they came from, that can be a very appetizing thing. And then the question often comes up, does this need to be a cycle? Well, before we go into that next slide, no, there are stories that do not have that return to the home or don't have it in the same, and we're back in the same city state that we began. Just to give an example, if we're to take the movie Avengers Infinity War, it ends at a place where the heroes are very much not victorious. They have lost. The big, terrible thing they were trying to prevent is gone. And so some people who might look at this through the lens of Joseph Campbell's model would say, well, that's only taking us partway through. And you have to look at the sequel movie, Infinity War's follow-up Avengers Endgame, to get the complete arc. And other people say, well, no, those are separate journeys, entirely separate. Those are both different ways you can explain it and understand them, and I think there's room for both interpretations. But if you're wondering, does the journey that you depict back in this story tree, does that necessarily need to return to its roots? Not necessarily. So let's go ahead and let's now switch to Microsoft Word. Okay, so we're going to go to the draw tool. This is if you wanted to draw with your mouse, or if you have a touchscreen stylus, you can just draw on the screen like that. That's not what I'm interested in right now. I'm going to go ahead and use Insert instead, and I'm going to use the Smart Art tool. Now, depending on how wide your screen is, you might see a full-size button or this little one here, but we're going to go ahead and look at this menu and try and decide what captures the kind of thing that you're going to do, going to create. Now, if you're taking the Joseph Campbell model, the hero's journey, we might take this basic cycle. And so now we have this menu to add the different options. And you can say the known, unknown, challenge, despair, re-engagement, victory, return. And without putting any specific details for a story here, you see we have a cycle that brings us back eventually to the known. So this is what it might look like if you were doing a cyclical story that puts you at the back at the beginning. And now we don't have to go further than the story of Adam and Eve or Romeo and Juliet to find some examples where they do not return to the beginning. Adam and Eve get expelled from the garden. They have to discover a new life with challenges, childbearing, and other things. If we were to look at Romeo and Juliet, well, our protagonists are dead at the end. And, it's been a gripping journey, but they're definitely not back at the starting point. So you can use the Smart Art tool and take something you've already created and say, well, this doesn't really fit that, and change the design. And you might have something that's just very linear with this vertical process. Perhaps it's bending where it's going around and winding. And you can change this back and forth and see if this fits what you are looking for. Now, there are a lot of options here. If you're creating the pot of soup, you might decide you want to use something like this funnel here. And you can see that this is set up in a way where we can only support a certain number of things in the funnel. Now, we can create sub-items here. And you can organize them like that. But ultimately, we have only so many large bubbles we can fit in that hopper, according to this. Now, I can rearrange that, but you can see that this particular design has a limit on how many large things we can have. Now, even if we are expanding that in size, we're still limited to that number here. All right. Now, if we go ahead and change our layout now to something else, you might be looking for something that expands. This is more the type that you might use for an organization chart. You might be looking for something that is showing relationships. But my guess is that if you're doing a tree, you have something where there's going to be some set of things that are grouped and some things that are divergent. And so you might ask yourself, is there something here that lends itself well to that sort of layout? And we might start with something like this. And you can always have an inverted tree. And by the way, the exact lookout here, this is going to be determined by the different levels. So you can see as I have this go down into various sublevels, they're grouped there. So you can use this to create a upside down tree, or you can go ahead and take this layout here and have Let me just rearrange some things here. So we're creating more sublevels here. And you can see now that everything is arising from this one thing. Now, that may not encompass everything you're looking for, so I do want to emphasize that you have a number of options here, and that we can set this to various arrangements, and that this might not even be the kind of thing that you're looking for. So you might decide to combine a couple of these. You might decide that our cauldron is more more figurative. We might even go back to something like this just to plot things together. And you can, by the way, change these shapes here. But let's say we decide we're just going to go out and draw something now. All right, I'm just going to delete all this. Now we'll go to the draw tool. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make myself a cauldron. It's going to be a simple cauldron here. I'm just using the drawing tool. And then there's the choice of what I put in here. Now, as you may recall, we have a variety of different elements here. And one of those is to put in the ingredients that are already simmering. Let's say this is a story that's reflective of a romance. All right, so I have a few more things I want to put in here. Now I could use the insert text tool here and just put in a text box. And so I'm going to take my text box here and I'm going to put in romance. And I can also copy this to just save a couple steps and then replace the text. And whatever you're putting in here is going to be that question of, do you want to use the visual layout to impart extra meaning? And so if we had old Ireland here, romance there, we'll put in poverty. Make this opportunity. And then I can use the draw tool, and as I'm rearranging these and start to get something in the final form, to look at how to connect them. Now you can see we're using something like a virtual crayon tool here. So one of the ways that you can make this look a little bit neater is to use a line for drawing. And so we have here the option of inserting a variety of things, and one of those could be a shape, like so. Or you could go ahead and add an arrow, especially if you're talking about directions. And you can see that these can be adjusted. You can rotate them around. So if you do change where you're laying out, it's a little bit faster to arrange versus if you were just drawing lines using the draw tool. And that's essentially all you need to do. Now, whether this is easier or faster for you than drawing on a piece of paper and taking a photo, that is certainly acceptable, but wanted to let you know about some of the things that you can do in Word itself. All right, let's go ahead and review the elements for this assignment. So we've got the two visual deliverables, the pot of soup or the tree, depending on what you choose to create. There's the annotated hero cycle, which you can use those same text things that you saw me using, and then a short reflection. Again, only 100 to 200 words. That's roughly a third of a paper to most of a page of paper. So I would say get started. You might change your idea as you see things taking shape. That's totally fine. If you make a list of some of the key ingredients or elements or milestones first, it'll probably be a little easier, faster. But either way, dive in and see how you might see these manifesting in other things that you read, watch, and consume. If you have any questions, feel free to send us an email at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu. You can visit our website to get a copy of the course paper template. Visit APA Style Central. That's a third link there for information about APA formatting. And with that, I bid you good night.